Sicilienne by Gabriel Fauré, and taken from a new album of music by the composer for cello and piano, from cellist Xavier Phillips and pianist Cédric Tiberghien, and that's released on La Dolce Volta label. And they are my guests on this week's Gramophone Podcast. I'm Martin Cullingford, editor of Gramophone, and welcome to this week's podcast, which is brought to you in association with Wigmore Hall, where in the coming week you can hear performances by the acclaimed ensemble Arcangelo under their director Jonathan Cohen, harpsichordist Mohannes Fahani with the Britten Symphonia, and the Pavel Haas Quartet. Gramophone award winners all, and there's much more. For a full list of concerts, visit wigmore-hall.org.uk. Now, back to the music of Fauré, and specifically his works for cello and piano, as recorded by Xavier Phillips and Cédric Tiberghien.
Xavier Phillips, hello.
Hello, Martin. How do you do?
Cédric Tiberghien, hello, welcome.
Yes, hello, Martin. It's so good to be with you.
Now, we're here to explore this beautiful new album of the music of Gabriel Fauré for cello and piano. But before we do that, let's talk about the nature of your collaboration as artists, how you first came to work together, and why then did you choose to explore Fauré? So, Cédric, you start.
Yes, we've been knowing each other for quite a while, but, we were neighbors in near Paris. And by meeting in front of our kids' school, we thought, okay, that's very stupid. We should really work together and play together. We wanted that for a long time. So we tried, and there was something, an instant connection that was very comfortable.
And as cellist and pianist, so much of the music is so integrated. Do you find when working with an artist, so here when working with Xavier, that you just somehow realised it was going to work, that somehow your musical visions were aligned?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a mix of, a human sparkle. When you meet someone, that on the human side it's going to work. So this is very important to me. And musically, I mean, it was so natural from the beginning. There was no doubt that we could start exploring, especially a complex repertoire as Gabriel Fauré. It really made sense immediately because, we were not even discussing things. Things were putting together. I mean, we both play a lot of chamber music, so it helps, but it really worked, from the first minutes.
And Xavier, as a cellist, this music would have been such an integral part of presumably the music that you would have learned and developed whilst becoming a cellist. When you then started working with Cédric, did it sort of fit with your view of the pieces, or did it actually challenge and make you feel slightly differently about this work, which would have been very familiar to you?
There was no challenge whatsoever. I totally share the feeling of Cédric concerning the human relationship. For me, I would say it's maybe the most important thing. Why? Because when you are really getting along, it's very, very easy then to work, and especially to accept other people's ideas. When you don't get along, it's very difficult. Everybody is fighting for his own ideas, which I found particularly ridiculous when it comes to music. I think the most important, and that's why I'm saying it was not a challenge, is really to allow the other person just to express himself and share ideas to build a very strong interpretation.
One thing that's always interested me about Fauré is his music. It feels his voice is very much his own, and yet we know that he was often very interested in what was going on elsewhere in Europe musically. And when he was at the Conservatoire, he was instrumental in bringing in composers which previously had been rejected there. Do you hear in his music the sort of the sense of sound and development of what was going on musically at the time of his life during this extraordinarily long life?
Yes, I agree with you on one point, but I have the feeling that even though he was very interested about everything was going on, around him, the feeling I have is he was always on his line, He's always composing the music from his heart. And he's never a fashion victim, if you allow me this expression. Yes, sometimes you can hear some influence, for instance, in the serenade. There is this bizarre melody at what time it's really like Catalan, song. There is some things like this. It's really like sparkles, but it's always the music of his heart. There's always this flow. For me, this is really the brand. This is the mark, the stone mark of the music of Fauré.
Now, to look specifically at the works on the album, we have shorter pieces, some very well-known pieces, Élégie Sicilienne, from perhaps earlier in his life, and then the two sonatas, which you've mentioned earlier, that came towards the end of his life and are perhaps more complex pieces of work. Do you recognise a sort of sense of shared unity of language between all of his writing for cello and piano, or do you see a development as we get towards the sonatas, almost a fulfilment of what he was trying to achieve with the combination of instruments and sound?
Well, I would say that we always feel the sense of line. Again, I mean, even in the early pieces, I mean, the melodies are unforgettable. It's so easy to, even whistle in the street after a concert, and which is a little bit more complex with the sonatas, but still, there's a sense of lines, sometimes shared between the piano and the cello, sometimes more for the cello, but I mean, if you take the second movement of the second sonata, for example, it's so, in a way, because of the key, but it's so close to the Élégie, and of course there are many years in between, and at the same time you instantly know this is the same composer. It's a little bit like Brahms, I really have the feeling, of course, there's a big, we could say there's a big gap between the early romantic composer who wrote his first works in the early 60s until, the 1920s, I mean, which is extraordinary, but still, I think exactly as Xavier said, it's his touch. So in a way, the sense of development and of evolution is very, it really belongs to him. It's even if it was romantic when he was young, more experimental when he was old, it's about his own personality. I don't know what you think, Xavier.
I cannot agree more. There is always this touch, as you mentioned, and it is getting more and more complex as is growing old. But I guess, it's let's say the normal development of the artist. And I would make a comparison with Beethoven. When you hear to the Werke ohne Opus from Beethoven, you depict, like in the instant, the genius is going to be. The genius is already is. I mean, he already is, sorry. And of course, with the development, with the maturity, the speech is getting more complex, but I would not say more complex because it has to be more complex because, there are ramifications, there are many, many things like arborescence, and there is also so much things to say and so little time. But I think we totally agree, Cédric and me, on the fact that you can just recognize the composer anyway, even if it's, you are listening to the berceuse, which is very naive. For instance, let's speak about this incredible finale from the first sonata, or the finale from the second sonata, which are so complex, at the same time, with the harmonies and I am very, very, very impressed, especially by the finale of the first sonata, because there is this allegro commodo, which was for us a challenge to try and keep the tempo recommended by Fauré. It's not a mathematical tempo; it was allegro commodo, and there is I think there is an indication if I recollect, but it was very difficult to stick to this because we had to slow down just to let the flow be itself, and I hope we succeeded on that.
What is extraordinary, it doesn't sound like the sonatas like an elderly person's music. It doesn't sound like there's no Mahlerian sense of contemplating mortality or eternity. It just is still full of the joy of beautiful melody and romanticism of his earlier works.
Yes. I think what struck me the most playing, especially the late sonatas, and during COVID time, I really spent a lot of time playing the nocturnes, and especially the late nocturnes. And in all of those pieces, we have the same feeling of, something which is for a long time cooking. He builds something, and there are, little bubbles, and towards the end, there's always this, I don't know the word in English, but incandescence, when suddenly it comes to fire in a second. And it's really striking in all those pieces, the way he builds things up, but very slowly. And you just think, he's an old man, so that's normal, it takes time. And suddenly when it explodes, you can't, there's so much fire and passion and useless in it. It's, I don't know so many composers who can achieve this sense of how to develop an idea, and the climax at the end is not the same kind of Wagnerian climax or Brahms climax. It's very specific to Fauré.
Yeah, it's wonderfully put, Cédric. So much of Fauré's music was written for voice, and there's all those extraordinary songs. Is that something that you hear or keep in mind as you approach the music that he wrote for instruments?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, I often say that to understand really the nature of the inside of a composer, you need to know his vocal music. It's the case for Schubert, of course, for Schumann, for Debussy, obviously. But with Fauré, it's like everywhere, even his writing very often, even in the music for cello and piano, is very much influenced by the way he wrote when he was with a singer. It doesn't mean it's accompaniment, because it's never that, divided, like the top line and just like semiquavers. But often still you have the feeling that actually those works could be definitely songs, Maybe it would be challenging if you take maybe the finale of the second sonata, but still, it could definitely, there's always this sense of lines, even, with the registers, you always think, oh, wow, he's just thinking of a baritone or maybe a soprano, but it's very clear. And for the piano part, it's when you've played a lot of melodies, which is my case, it becomes very natural.
And Xavier, do you feel the same as the cellist, that there's a sort of sense of almost vocal singing line behind so many of the themes that he gives you to play?
Exactly, and that's the challenge. Because when you play Fauré on the cello, you must remember at all time that you need some strength, you need some power in the sound, but also this delicacy, which is for me really, well, it's such a given, to say that the cello is very, close to the voice. Everybody says that, but it's not that clear for all composers, and they are not asking the same thing for the same instrument. But with Fauré, for me, you need, exactly as mentioned Cédric, even though this man was old, he kept the same passion as a young man, exactly as a young man. It is only taking more time to develop, is more patient, but at the end, the explosion is just the same. But in this process, the explosion has to be always very, let's say, very controlled. And there is this sense of control also in the sound. Get me right, it's not that you have to play with prudence. No, that's the challenge. The sound has to go out very, very easy. I have for instance, it's the second movement of the second sonata, the one mentioned Cédric, which is so close to the elegy, and you have this passage with repeated notes of the cello, and there is this big crescendo. And this is very, actually very difficult to build that crescendo without, scratching, without parasites. It has to always to be very beautiful, like a voice. You don't expect a singer to damage his voice while singing. It would be very ugly. So always this, I wouldn't say varnish, but this delicacy, which you need when you play this music. Very important.
And finally, it's beautifully recorded. Can you tell us something about the recording venue and the label La Dolce Volta's approach to sound and presentation?
Well, as the producer's magic as well. The hall is L'Arsenal in Metz. In Metz, they have two halls. There's a big hall, which is probably too big for chamber music, and a smaller chamber music hall, which honestly is quite dry. It's drier than actually what you hear on the recording. And the work we did just to find the right balance, it took a while because this music needs space to blossom, And it was a good process, but the producer, Aline Blondiot, I really like her very much. And because what she found, I think, didn't betray what we were doing. It was really creating a beautiful space using the sound of the hall, but adding a bit of volume as well, like a bit of, three-dimensional maybe. And I find myself that Xavier's cello, for example, has like all the space to speak, and it's such a fantastic instrument and beautifully played, of course, that it needed this space, and I think they did a fantastic job.
The music for cello and piano of Gabriel Fauré, performed by Xavier Phillips on cello and Cédric Tiberghien on piano, is available from La Dolce Volta. Xavier Phillips, Cédric Tiberghien, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
An excerpt from Fauré's Sonata for Cello and Piano in G minor, and my thanks to Xavier Phillips and Cédric Tiberghien for joining me today to talk about the composer's music. And my thanks too to Wigmore Hall for supporting this week's podcast, and a reminder that for a full list of concerts at the acclaimed London chamber music venue, you can visit wigmore-hall.org.uk. And finally, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it, we'd be hugely grateful if you could leave a rating or a review, hit the subscribe button, or simply tell your friends about our work. And if you want to explore classical music in even greater depth with Gramophone, then we produce a monthly magazine packed full of interviews, features and reviews. And all listeners to this podcast can get a 20% discount by visiting gramophone.co.uk/subscribe and entering podcast 20 at the checkout. And do join us again for another Gramophone podcast next week.